Hello, everybody, and welcome to the UNDP Turkey and the Atlantic Council in Turkey launch event on Turkey's refugee resilience. Ladies and gentlemen, distinguished guests and viewers joining us online, it gives me great pleasure to welcome you all to the official launch of the UNDP Atlantic Council report on Turkey's refugee resilience. Now, this is a brand new analysis looking at expanding and improving solutions for the economic inclusion of Syrians here in Turkey. Now, I'm Maria Ramos. I'm a TV news anchor here at TRT World, and it's a pleasure to welcome you from Istanbul, live from our studio here at TRT World. Now, this is a report that is being launched globally. It's for policy and decision makers from all around the world to learn from the experience of Turkey in hosting the largest refugee population in the world. Now, we have an incredible lineup of leading experts, officials, activists, and creative minds to discuss the report and also look at solutions. But before we start, a bit of housekeeping. First, for our audience, great to have you here, and we really want to hear from you. We have a Q&A session at the end, so to ask a question, this is a procedure. Please write it in the Q&A box along with your name, title, and affiliation. Anonymous questions will not be answered. And the questions from the audience will be addressed right at the end of the panel session. But we encourage you, strongly encourage you to start now, start submitting your questions right now. The UNDP and the Atlantic Council will make sure no question remains unanswered. And we also encourage you to engage with us on social media using the handles at AC_Istanbul, UNDP Turkey, also Atlantic Council and at UNDP. Plus, we have the hashtag Leave No One Behind. And a gentle reminder to our panelists, please stick to time. Brevity is very beautiful. And now, without further ado, I'd like to introduce our very first speaker, joining us from Washington, D.C. for the opening remarks. And our guest from Washington, D.C. is Damon Wilson, Executive Vice President of the Atlantic Council. Now, over the last decade, the Council has grown to become one of the most influential global think tanks, including right here in Turkey, with its Turkey program, where the Council has been promoting transatlantic dialogue on key issues, including refugees and migration. Mr. Wilson, the floor is yours.
Thank you so much, Maria. What a fantastic introduction. I want to welcome all of our guests who are joining us today. We are delighted to host you for the release of this new report from our Atlantic Council and Turkey program, Turkey's Refugee Resilience, Expanding and Improving Solutions for the Economic Inclusion of Syrians in Turkey. I'm just delighted that the Atlantic Council's Turkey program is partnering with the United Nations Development Program and their Turkey office to publish this report. I think as many of our international institutions are facing great challenge, we are pleased to see this valuable cooperation between our organizations. So thank you for that. But after all, today's discussion is about people. It's about refugees. It's about those that are suffering. And I had the chance, thanks to our Turkey office, to visit Gaziantep, to visit the border of Syria, and to meet with those communities and to see the burden that Turkey has been carrying with the tragedy of the unfolding war in Syria. But for today's conversation, I want to first thank Deputy Minister Karan, who is joining us today. And on his behalf, I want to thank the Turkish Ministry of Foreign Affairs, Minister Çavuşoğlu, who joined us just in April on this platform, for their engagement in our preparation of this report and our work on refugees and migration in general. The Council is proud to have had a presence in Turkey for over a decade. Migration and refugee issues are one of the main focus areas of our current program, and we're proud of that. Our work is aimed at contributing to the policy debate and to be a platform for better understanding Turkey's role in the global refugee crisis. Thanks to our Turkey representative, who is also with us, Director Defne Arslan and her great team, Pinar Dost and Grady Wilson, we are covering this and other really important issues on the agenda between the United States, Turkey, and in the transatlantic relationship. I also want to take this opportunity to thank and welcome Ebru Özdemir, who is with us. She's a longtime friend and supporter of the Council and our programming in Turkey, and has been particularly strong and prominent in supporting our refugee work which she has really inspired. We're working with Ebru on a documentary on Syrian women entrepreneurs, which will be launched later this year. So since 2014, Turkey has hosted the world's largest refugee population and has invested significant resources in ensuring access to health, education, employment, and social service systems for these Syrian refugees. The international community plays a role in supporting Turkey and other refugee hosting countries, of course, but the burden on host nations is enormous, and the task has become even more difficult in the midst of a COVID-19 unprecedented global pandemic. Politics and geopolitics also often complicate, if not exacerbate, the plight of these populations. Furthermore, the world is experiencing the most severe economic downturn since the Great Depression, including unprecedented levels of unemployment in many countries. So how can we ensure refugees access to employment in such an environment? How do we help these communities become more self-reliant? These are all important questions that this report and today's conversation will tackle. We really put an emphasis in this report on engagement and partnership with the private sector, as well as pursuing some innovative solutions such as e-work and online livelihood opportunities. Consistent with the Atlantic Council's mission of engagement with allies and partners to solve global challenges, we have convened today key actors and representatives from countries and institutions that are responding to the humanitarian crisis and working on the development of refugees and migrants caused by the civil war in Syria, a tragic war now in its 10th year. The Atlantic Council has team members that have been leading voices on the crisis in Syria, pushing for better policy options, as well as a resolution of this war and a rebuilding of an inclusive Syrian state and society based on the consent of the governed as the ultimate solution to the Syrian sufferings. But I want to thank, to kick this off, the UNDP Turkey representative, Claudio Tomasi, for our partnership, Bastian Revel from UNDP Turkey, who has been the author of this report. And I also want to thank UNHCR Turkey, which is joining us today, for their tremendous work. And last but not least, I want to echo my gratitude and thanks to you, Maria Ramos. What a terrific moderator. We're delighted to have you with us today. I'm going to hand the floor back to you to get the discussion underway.
Thank you so much, Mr. Wilson, for your remarks and for opening the discussion so beautifully. And that was Damon Wilson, Executive Vice President of the Atlantic Council, joining us from Washington. Now, before we move on, a quick reminder to our audience, if you've just joined us, this is the launch of the UNDP Atlantic Council report on Turkey's refugee resilience. And coming up next, we'll be hearing keynote speeches from the UNDP and also from the Deputy Minister of Foreign Affairs. And now I'd like to introduce Mirjana Spoljaric-Egger, Assistant Administrator and Director of the Regional Bureau for Europe and the Commonwealth of Independent States at the UNDP. It's great to have you here, Mirjana. My question to you is the following. The UNDP is the co-author of this report that we have here on refugees. Can you tell us why migration and refugees are so critical to the UN Development Agency?
Thank you, Maria, and Deputy Foreign Minister and dear colleagues. I'm first of all very pleased to be here, and thank you for having me co-launch this report on Turkey's refugee resilience, expanding and improving solutions for the economic inclusion of Syrians in Turkey. I would also start by thanking the Atlantic Council for the excellent collaboration in producing this report, and you, Maria, and TRT World for hosting us today. And finally, I would also like to thank everybody joining us in this discussion of Syria refugees in Turkey in the face of a global socioeconomic crisis that was triggered, as Damon said, by the current pandemic. And just like my previous speaker, I want to start by recognizing the continued generosity and hospitality Turkey provides for 4 million refugees and asylum seekers in its territory. The country has demonstrated pragmatism and foresight in which it responds to a significant refugee crisis, probably the biggest since World War II. And therefore, Turkey continues to stand out as best practice in terms of its approach to refugees, but also its involvement in global policy processes such as the Global Compact on Migration and the Global Compact on Refugees. Most importantly, Turkey has created conditions for the refugees to find accommodation and live in cities so that they are not trapped, like in many other cases, in camps for years. And the spirit with which the nation, and especially most of all, its citizens, embrace this challenge really deserves our respect. The UN Development Programme has been working in Turkey since the 1950s. Over the last decade, we have scaled up our programming in response of the refugee influx in particular. And UNDP's approach is to always connect humanitarian with crisis-related interventions to national development priorities. So this is why we have advocated since day one that humanitarian and life-saving interventions have to be complemented by longer-term resilience-building strategies, which means addressing the question of jobs, municipal services, environment, social cohesion, and self-reliance. To put the words into action in our response to the Syria crisis, we have taken a leadership role together with our colleagues from UNHCR through the Refugee and Resilience Response Plan, the so-called 3RP. The plan has proven to be not only a successful way to provide an integrated humanitarian and resilience response to one of the largest refugee crises of our time, but also emerged as a global model on how to cope with this type of crisis. The 3RP has been at the forefront of many policy and programmatic innovations, including support to national and local systems, using technology to increasing efficiency and impact, and supporting the self-reliance of refugees and host communities at the same time. Now, where do we come in as UNDP? And Maria, you asked this question. For UNDP, it's resilience that constitutes the guiding principle in such contexts. We see resilience as the ability to cope with and recover from shocks, and at the same time sustain development gains of the past. This includes strengthening the required capacities at all levels, not only for the refugee communities, but we work at the same time and at the same levels with the host communities, as well as relevant national and international and local institutions. So supporting access to decent jobs is a key priority in that context. Host countries cope with the direct consequences of refugee arrivals and presence by extending primarily social services to them. Now, the response of Turkish institutions to open up the labor market to refugees and to foster their access not only to employment, but also to entrepreneurship is a global example of successfully making the link between humanitarian assistance and development goals. It demonstrates how refugees can be included in national and local services, while also actively contributing to the local economy. Now, in spite of this, and nevertheless, and although we have collectively supported Turkey for the 9 last years, the report we are launching today also highlights that poverty and vulnerability still remains widespread amongst refugee and local host communities. In particular, also unemployment, as has been mentioned before. Now, in Turkey, like elsewhere, the impact of COVID has been severe, affecting not only the public health, but also bringing socioeconomic impact on the society. And in this pandemic, like in every other crisis of this dimension, the most vulnerable are hit first, and they are mostly hit. And the most vulnerable in this situation are again the women-held households, persons with disability, children, and unemployed youth. Our responsibility is now to ensure that we support efforts that are realistic and that we make sure that no one is left behind. Now, against this backdrop, it is clear that resilience is needed more than ever. We have to make that connection and we have to focus on it. Our responsibility as UNDP is not only to continue working hand in hand with the government and private sector partners, but also with the UN family and international financial institutions. What we have to do now is to spearhead a conversation about how we can scale development impact by exploring new solutions and also new ways of working. In the current context of growing vulnerabilities in the entire region, business as usual is no longer an option we can pursue. And we must therefore frame and reinvigorate our support in a comprehensive, forward-looking manner. Turkey has led the way in many aspects already and has done more than its share to host the largest refugee population in the world. So we need to continue doing our utmost to capitalize on progress achieved in line with the principle of burden sharing as it is outlined in the Global Compact that I mentioned at the outset. And with this, thanks again for inviting me to this meeting. I wish you a great event and fruitful discussions. Thank you, Maria.
Thank you so much, Mirjana, for your remarks and for really showing all the dimensions of that word, resilience, that is in the title, Turkey's refugee resilience. That was Mirjana Spoljaric-Eger, Assistant Administrator and Director for the Regional Bureau for Europe and the Commonwealth of Independent States at the UNDP. All right, we continue, and it gives me great pleasure to introduce our next guest, His Excellency Yavuz Selim Kiran, Deputy Minister of Foreign Affairs, Republic of Turkey. The floor is yours.
Thank you very much, Maria. Distinguished panelists, dear audience, ladies and gentlemen, first of all, I would like to thank Atlantic Council, UNDP and TRT World for organizing this very timely and important event. I hope this joint report with UNDP will contribute to international awareness on Syrians in Turkey. Unfortunately, today, global displacement is at the highest level. There are nearly 80 million forcibly displaced people in the world. Providing them with humanitarian assistance is crucial, but not enough. We have to seek more sustainable solutions. We need to deliver these people opportunities to sustain their lives, develop their self-reliance, and contribute to national economies of host countries. The case of Syrians is no exception. The COVID-19 pandemic brought additional challenges for all countries. It also added more strain on displaced Syrians and host countries. It further worsened their already vulnerable situation. It is time to redouble our efforts to help Syrians, host communities, and countries. In response to the pandemic, we did our utmost to assist other countries in need. Upon the instructions of our President, Recep Tayyip Erdogan, we have met the request of 140 countries out of 153. In line with our humanitarian and enterprising foreign policy, we are now the second largest provider of medical aid and assistance in the world. In the same manner, we continue to assist refugees under our care. Our inclusive policies have not changed despite difficulties encountered because of COVID-19. Thanks to our strong healthcare system, we provide Syrians free medical care and other basic services. Education of children is a major priority. At the start of the crisis, the school enrollment rate was only 30% among Syrian refugees. By our determined efforts, we more than doubled this to 63% within 6 years. Today, there are more than 1 million school-age Syrian children in Turkey, and 685,000 of them are studying in our schools. They continue to receive uninterrupted education at these times. We are providing them with distance learning opportunities. The rate of higher education is also a success. 27,000 Syrian students are currently studying in Turkish universities. This corresponds to more than half of all refugees getting higher education in the world. To support Syrians economically, we focus our efforts on their self-reliance. Thanks to the hard work of our authorities, we took a series of measures to include Syrians into the labor market. We achieved significant results in increasing the quantity of vocational trainings, improving skill matching mechanisms, developing employment of Syrians, as well as awareness-raising activities. During the pandemic, Syrians are benefiting from the same economic assistance packages we extended to our citizens. We made no distinction. We work closely with the UNDP and UNHCR to compensate the negative effects of the pandemic on the employment opportunities of Syrians. 20,000 families will benefit from a cash assistance project we jointly initiated with the UNHCR. We should not lose that we have tried so hard to achieve in this field. Therefore, further contribution of the international community is very important. I hope that the report launched today will be a useful guide for our common future efforts in this direction. Turkey is a vocal player at international forums regarding the improvement of the rights of the refugees. We fully support the Global Compact on Refugees. Turkey also co-chaired the Global Refugee Forum that took place in December 2019 in Geneva. We have accumulated a vast pool of good practices towards Syrians in many fields, including their access to the labor market. We shared them during the Global Refugee Forum. We sincerely hope that relevant stakeholders will follow our lead in this respect. We have also continued our efforts to draw the attention of the international community to refugees during the pandemic. On the 9th of June, our Minister Mayor Çavuşoğlu hosted a high-level anti-diplomacy forum on this issue. As we emphasize on every occasion, there is an urgent need to focus on durable solutions. Offering more resettlement opportunities and other third country solutions for Syrians are vital to provide them a dignified life. International community needs to do more in this regard. The most durable solution for the Syrian refugees is safe, voluntary, and dignified returns. Today, most of the displaced Syrians want to go home once the conditions allow them. We cannot sit back and wait for these conditions to create themselves in Syria. We have to work all together to prepare relevant humanitarian, security, and physical conditions as to encourage Syrians to go back. Meanwhile, we should support those who voluntarily decide to return to Syria. Thanks to our counter-terrorism operations, more than 400,000 Syrians in Turkey have already returned safely to northern Syria. To make sustainable returns possible, international community should work together. We are doing our part to enable safe returns. With the initiative of our Minister Çavuşoğlu, Turkey, Lebanon, Jordan, and Iraq are already cooperating with respect to safe returns of Syrians. So far, our foreign ministers met twice. We also have a high-level dialogue with UNHCR on this issue. We want to maintain these valuable cooperation mechanisms. I would like to stress once again that increasing our efforts to help Syrians is more relevant and necessary than ever. Thank you very much, and please leave no one behind. Thank you.
Thank you so much. His Excellency Yavuz Selim Kiran, Deputy Minister of Foreign Affairs, Republic of Turkey. Thank you so much for your remarks, your time, and for giving us the perspective of the Turkish government. Thank you. All right, we continue, and I want to take a quick second to remind our audience that where we are, and if you've just joined us, welcome to the launch of the Atlantic Council and UNDP report on Turkey's refugee resilience. This is the report we're talking about. You can see it online. Now, we've just heard about the key points of this report from the institutions behind it. And a reminder to our audience, we want to hear from you. This is an active discussion. And for that, please put your question in the Q&A box with your name, your affiliation, and of course, your title. No anonymous questions will be answered. All right, time now in this discussion to turn our attention to the solutions concerning this report. And for that, we're going to bring in three new guests, and they are the three speakers who are going to join us, and they are Claudio Tomasi, who is the resident representative of the UNDP in Turkey. Welcome. Also, Ebru Özdemir, chairperson of Limak Investments. Welcome to you. And Daniela Cikela, Deputy Representative for the Protection of the UNHCR Turkey. Welcome to all three of you for this next part of our discussion. Now, first, I'd like to go to you, Claudio, first of all. Claudio Tomasi, resident representative of the UNDP Turkey. Now, we are gathered virtually, Claudio, to launch this report from the UNDP and the Atlantic Council on refugees' economic inclusion. But tell us, what is new in this report, Claudio, and why is it important and why now?
Thank you, Maria, and it's great to be here with all of you. First of all, let me thank Deputy Minister Kiran for his presence today and for the solid cooperation with the Ministry of Foreign Affairs and the government of Turkey on this important issue. And let me also take the opportunity to greet our Atlantic Council, LIMAC, and UNHCR partners, and all UNDP colleagues, and all the people who have joined us today. And finally, let me thank as well you and the TRT World for hosting us once again. Very much appreciated. So coming to your question, why is this report important? Well, there are a couple of reasons, in my opinion. One is because us to showcase the experience and the best practices from Turkey on the global stage. We heard some of it from the Deputy Minister and from Iriana previously. And we are very pleased to partner with a renowned think tank such as the Atlantic Council to work on this report, as we both felt that a lot of the work and achievements from Turkey in supporting refugee socioeconomic inclusion has not gotten the credit it deserves on the international scene. So Turkey has been a true pioneer on hosting refugees and putting international commitments, such as the ones from the Global Compact on Refugees, into practice. It is our role as leading global development partner to make sure others have the chance to capitalize on what has been achieved. A second good reason why this report is important is that it comes at a critical time. Indeed, as you know, 2 weeks ago, more than 84 delegations took Brussels for conference on supporting Syria and the region, reiterating once again the support of the international community to Syrian refugees and their host countries, pledging more than $5.5 billion to support Syrian refugees. To ourselves an idea what Turkey has been investing and spending for the refugees here is in the order of 40 billion so far. See quite a disproportionate colleagues will bring up to the table. So this marked the Brussels IV conference marked a key milestones as we're dealing with the COVID-19 pandemic. And so it is critical to take stock now of the lessons learned and the progress achieved over the past 6 years in order to guide our further work and our recovery response to COVID-19 with a specific attention to the refugees and the host community to leave no one behind. Coming quickly to the second part of your question, why? I mean, what is new in this report? I think what is new that this report provides a comprehensive analysis of the current situation facing refugees and host communities when it comes to socioeconomic inclusion, and gives and provides unique insights and perspective from all stakeholders dealing with the issue. So it deals with the complexity and the scale at the task at hand. Out of the 4 million refugees hosted by Turkey, both Syrians and other nationalities, nearly half are living under the poverty line. The Emergency Social Safety Net, ESSN program, basically has been able to reach 1.7 million households to receive regular cash transfer. But the question is, okay, how this will transit into more sustainable solutions? So this tells us a very important thing, that humanitarian assistance and informal work are not enough to foster resilience and self-reliance. And this has dire consequences on the life of the most vulnerable. Access to employment for Syrian women has remained very limited, while on the other hand, we see that a growing number of children are forced to work to support their families. Social tensions are also looming and is a possible development in the situation. Secondly, the report sheds light on the work done by the government of Turkey and its partners to tackle the situation. We have heard it from the Deputy Minister. The government, the key institutions such as Ministry of Family, Labour and Social Services have long realized the importance to access to formal employment and decent work to foster self-reliance, but also positive inclusion in the host communities. In this respect, the work that has been carried out is exemplary. And we heard about it. First of all, is the setting up of an appropriate policy framework, despite the highly sensitive nature of the topic. The Syrians under temporary protection can access the labor market as employment. The work permit regulations for the temporary protection beneficiaries was adopted as early as 2016 and has been since then complemented by important policy strategies such as the ESSN exit strategy and the harmonization strategy. So the government has been also very pragmatic to ensure that some of the safeguards included in the legal framework, for example, the quota on foreigners in each business, limitation of work outside of the province of registration, do not turn into unwarranted obstacles to access existing opportunities. So this approach by public institutions is increasing leading to results, with more work permits granted to Syrians in 2019 than in all previous years combined. And this is an important element. And Turkey also hosting a record number of registered Syrian businesses at the moment. Of course, there is still a long way to go and many challenges ahead of us. But these are real success stories of it to be highlighted in Turkey and beyond. Let me finish this answer by saying that this report very much lives up to our commitment to continue deepening partnerships and expanding solutions. So we outline in this report innovative and realistic options and recommendations to foster meaningful private sector engagement. This would require moving beyond perceiving the private sector only as a supplier of goods or as beneficiary of technical and financial support. We're engaging both Turkish and Syrian companies, and we're also capitalizing on the work at the global level to explore digital livelihoods as particularly relevant in the context of Turkey, considering the progressive policy framework in place, the high quality of internet infrastructure, and the existing global connection of the Turkey private sector. And also, we are confident that this joint work will provide the keystones, open providing policy option to explore what has been done so far and how it can be further improved. So we're contributing in this way to a collective effort for a more predictable and sustainable response to displacement and to leave no one behind. Over to you, Maria.
Claudio, thank you so much. And that was Claudio Tomasi, resident representative of the UNDP Turkey. And we will be hearing from Claudio later in the discussion. Okay, now I want to turn to Ebru Özdemir. I'd like to introduce her. She is the chairwoman of Limak Investments, and that is the domestic and international investment arm of the Limak Group, operating mainly in infrastructure and energy sectors. Welcome to you. It really is great to have you, and you represent a leading private sector company here in Turkey, also supporting international projects on gender equality and women's empowerment, as well as innovation and also financing for the very important SDGs. And actually, you are the only private sector representative on this panel. So welcome, extra welcome to you. Now, we know the private sector has a significant role to play when dealing with the migration situation. So I'd like to start with a very personal question to you, if I may. Why does migration matter to you so much, and also to the private sector in general?
Thank you, Maria, and thanks to TRT World for hosting. And first of all, I would like to thank the Atlantic Council Turkey and UNDP Turkey for this joint report. And I'd like to express how excited I am to be invited to this panel with the UNDP Turkey representative Claudio and UN Refugee Agency UNHCR representative Daniela. And I'd like to, of course, thank to Deputy Minister Kıran and to Miss Mirjana, and for Damien for opening remarks. And I always would like to thank and appreciate the efforts of Ms. Defne Aslan, the Turkey representative of Atlantic Council, and her team for these tremendous efforts in building these reports. I feel really privileged to be present here for obviously 3 reasons. First of all, refugees in Turkey, particularly the refugee resilience, is an issue very close to my heart as a Turkish citizen and also as a Turkish businesswoman. And secondly, it's a great honor to share the panel with the representatives because as Limak, we also do other projects with UNDP Turkey, the Engineer Girls of Turkey, which is Türkiye'nin Mühendis Kızları, a flagship social investments of our company. And last but not the least, we have been cooperating with Atlantic Council over 3 years in Turkey now, and we do different work. We just go around the different subjects and issues like the energy, North Macedonia, and Turkish relationships with the West. And we also started to work on the refugee situation 2 years ago, actually, and we published the first report, another report, and we presented it in New York, in Istanbul, and the European Parliament in Brussels. And now we're also working on some other projects, as Damien said. And now it's very important to actually work on the second phase, which was the refugee resilience. Frankly speaking, representing the private sector, I'm very excited to contribute to the discussions from the policy perspective. And something also we'd like to lead, and we really would, as you said, we are the only private company here, but our aim is to create an example for the other private sector companies to actively work on these very important issues. Coming to the question, you asked me why the migration issue mattered to me, to us, to our company. I strongly believe that to all these very important and very difficult problems, the private sector needs to be the part of the solutions. This is actually the vision and our involvement in the issue. I mean, with government addressing these issues on the policy levels, the private sector also has a very critical role to provide answers to the humanitarian needs, but also supporting the refugee resettlement and integration. And this is what actually the refugee resilience means to me. I mean, private sector has to be involved in the economical development, on the job creation, on the digital solutions. These are the key components of the long-term solutions. Actually, this is what the report also tells. But we always have to bear in mind something. I mean, this is not only one-sided. Refugees also bring with them a wealth of untapped human capital. This is the word, the untapped human capital is a phrase that I've always tell, and they can and they often do make significant contributions to the economies of the host communities. They create jobs, they become entrepreneurs, and afterwards, eventually, of course, when they go back, they also create value to their home countries as long as they are given an opportunity. And by building refugees' resilience and by adding them value and by harnessing their skills, the private sector make also the business case for how refugees can benefit both from the bottom lines and the local economies. And in turn, I think the refugees can learn a livelihood and accumulate the skills and experience that set them up to success here in the host countries first. And then when the time comes for them, when they return back, they create the value there. This is how I see.
Ebru, I'm writing everything because it's so interesting. And I really love what you said. They bring this untapped human capital. And it's great to hear that you, Limak, you want to create an example for other companies. Thank you so much for now. And we'll be hearing from Ebru Özdemir, chairperson of Limak Investments, later in the discussion. Thank you. All right, we continue. And now I'd like to bring in Daniela Cikela, who is the Deputy Representative for Protection of the UNHCR here in Turkey. Welcome to you, Daniela. A bit more about what the UNHCR is doing. It is, as I'm sure you all know, the UN Refugee Agency, and they're focused both on providing assistance to refugees, but also, this is important, protecting their rights and their dignity. So my question to you, Daniela, is how do you see access to work as critical to empowering refugees, and what can other countries learn from the situation here in Turkey?
Thank you, Maria. And thank you also for the opportunity to be here on behalf of the Refugee Agency in this very important event with representative of the Turkish government, but also with colleagues from UNDP and EBRO in representation of the private sector. Going back to your question, I would say that from UNHCR perspective, the Global Compact on Refugees is probably the best way, a best framework to address the question that you just posed. The Global Compact on Refugees, which was affirmed in 2018, it builds really on the experience from different countries, different stakeholders and good practices. And also it's very important blueprint. It provides a blueprint from a comprehensive response to the situation of the refugees, aiming especially at ensuring that host countries and refugee communities can receive the support that they need, and also that refugees can lead a productive life. One of the 4 very important objectives of the Global Compact on Refugees is indeed to enhance the self-reliance of refugees, but underlining especially the importance of employment and self-employment to self-reliance. Now, one important element also to stress is the fact that the Global Compact on Refugees provides also a new approach, an approach that tries to move away from the perception of seeing refugees only and exclusively as a recipient of humanitarian assistance, also for very prolonged period of time. It is important to see refugees more and more also as active participants to the life of the country where they live, including the economic life of the country where they live. So this initiative, this framework, shows also through a collective experience that refugees, if provided the opportunity, can contribute, and I would say contribute substantially to the host country and also for the benefit of refugees and the host communities. As already the Deputy Minister has clearly indicated in the beginning, the government of Turkey is definitely a champion in the Global Compact on Refugees. Not only because it has co-chaired it and it has substantially contributed to its development, but especially because we have put together a number of good practices for the refugee responses, including also in support to access to work. One of the most important practices that see Turkey that can be inspiring also for all other countries is definitely the legal framework of Turkey. A legal framework that provides the basis to facilitate the access to refugees to the labor market, but not only that. It's important also to mention that it indicates that all the associated entitlements that basically are related also to social security, to wage protection, something that is of extreme importance for UNHCR and for the refugees globally, particularly in considering that the refugees is the country that hosts the largest number of refugees at global level. So as I mentioned, an important inspiration. Another important element is also that we can draw from the experience in Turkey and of Turkey is how practically all this commitment to the Global Compact on Refugees can be effectively supported. And here we come to this very important, I would say, approach in Turkey of whole society approach, which we can also look into the presence today at this panel all together, government institutions, UN agencies, partners, private sectors, all together, we can make actually this resilience of refugees a reality. And of course, it's very important to mention in the context of Turkey, the importance of cooperating also with other entities, the ISKUR, the Department, the Ministry of Family, Labor and Social Services, and other entities. So in conclusion, while this legislation, this legal framework is enabling, it is an important first step, the actually concerted efforts that all together are being made in Turkey to make the self-reliance a reality is probably one on an additional very important good practice that Turkey can inspire other countries. Also, it's very important to mention the challenges and opportunities that we have also in front of us. Clearly, sometimes job opportunities can also be perceived as a negative element in terms of competition of jobs opportunities. But if strategically put it, if programs opportunities for to promote promote joint economic ventures between refugee community and those communities are undertaken can be a very important drive for social cohesion, to strengthen more the bonds within communities. Refugees, as mentioned already by my colleagues, also by colleagues from UNDP, refugee entrepreneurship is very important for social cohesion. There are also other important challenges that we are all working together, which are also in relation, of course, to some challenges, languages, but also the importance of recognition of qualification acquired before coming to Turkey for refugees, but also certification of the qualification acquired in Turkey. That will be also very important in the future, maybe also in view of a possible return. In all this context, of course, how we all together will face and support Turkey and refugees with the impact of the COVID-19 is also very important. So to conclude on a very positive note, going back to your question on how Turkey can also inspire other countries, it is important to say that we are already doing that, and together with the government, we have also been sharing already actively the good practice of Turkey. On our website, we can already find 57 good practices of Turkey. And just to give a context, to put in a global context this number, you can tell that almost a bit more than 60 good practices are consolidated together in other regions, like the Eastern North Africa region, in the Europe region, but 57 are only in Turkey, and 15 out of them are in relation to access to work and resilience of refugees. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Daniela Cichela from the UNHCR, and I will make sure, and I'm sure our audience will do too, to look at those 57 good practices from Turkey that the international community can learn about. We'll be hearing more from Daniela from the UNHCR, but let's go now back to the UNDP and bring in Claudio once again to discuss how to respond to the challenges that have been raised. Claudio, so you as regional director, she underlined when she spoke at the beginning, Miriana, she said the UNDP's role is not only to provide policy advice, but also to support the government of Turkey, and also to implement concrete actions to directly help the most vulnerable. So tell us, what have you learned from all the refugee programs that you have here in Turkey?
Thank you, Maria. Good question. Again, and indeed, the quality of our analysis to put them into practice. So as you were saying, as UNDP, we are not an academic institutions. We get our hands dirty on the field, and while doing that, we all learn important lessons. So I'm pleased to are co-leading together with our partners of UNHCR on the Refugee and Resilience Regional Plan, which is the response of the UN and NGOs to support the Syria crisis in the refugee hosting countries. Within this framework, we are leading the livelihood sector, which has to do exactly about how people become self-reliant and how they transition from being a burden to being an opportunity for themselves, for their family, and for society. So in this framework, we have developed and implemented quite a large response program, and we have been the leading partner of the Turkish government, especially on delivering on job creation and employability. And let me tell you that this has not been easy, because especially in the first years of the crisis, the main international attention was on assistance. The main international attention was on other sectors, on the health, on the education, very important indeed, but predicating or discussing the long-term, the self-reliance, the employability, the employment was like the desert for quite time, but with time passing by and with a great inroads. So, for example, to give you some practical example, in terms of job creation and facilitation, so far 4,000 sustainable jobs for both Syrians and Turkish citizens in host communities have been provided. And we have done that in collaboration with the Ministry of Industry and Technology, and by supporting Turkish and own businesses as well including the establishment of small and medium enterprises, innovation and capability centers on the ground. For example, we provide training and tailor-made business development programs on lean manufacturing and innovation in small and medium enterprises. Entrepreneurs and start businesses for Syrians and host community members. I always highlight some principles that we have been respecting from the very beginning, because if we want to work in the direction of the social cohesion, it's not possible to work exclusively with the Syrian refugees, but actually give equal access to vulnerable population in the host community. We are having been leading on adult language training in Turkey, of course, and we have trained over 30,000 people together with the Ministry of National Education since last year, including 72% are women. And also, last but not least, we're working hand in hand with the Turkish employment agency, İşkur, to bring employment services to people who need it. We have provided İşkur with a mobile bus to act as an effective one-stop service point, which will bring employment services and consultancy directly to the doorstep of hard-to-reach communities. This is actually because this practical experience that they're helping with our partners on the field, on the ground, and the lesson learned of our daily work, that we felt that producing such a report was important. It's a kind of a distillation of these efforts that together we have been carrying out day in and day out in order to feed, again, it's like a loop, to feed again a second generation of policies in this sense. Because I will finish with this important point, is that bringing up to scale what has been done remains an important challenge and an important opportunity. As Maria was saying, we're talking about untapped human capital, and to opportunities is key. Key for development, is key for human development, is key for resilience, is exactly what we're trying to advocate for and work day in, day out at the local level and at the national and international levels. Over to you, Maria.
Thank you so much, Claudio. And we'll be hearing from Claudio again. Let's go back now to the private sector and bring in Ebru Özdemir from LIMAC. So the report, Ebru, underlines a need for a private sector drive to really invest in refugee potential. And as you said, and as Claudio said, untapped human capital. And you're engaged through LIMAC on the refugee situation, and you also practice and partner with some other innovative solutions, and also some that empower and integrate refugees and support women's empowerment. So tell us, from your experience, how can different actors work together with businesses and the private sectors to really expand opportunities for refugees and host communities?
Thank you. Great question. Unfortunately, I mean, we have to blame ourselves as the private sector, because we are very slow on board on the refugees to try the new solutions or the new innovations, as we have done in our businesses. And as you said, the business case needs to be really repeated for more companies to embrace it and to bring it to another opportunity so that every other company can follow. And in Turkey, actually, we have a very big, great opportunity here. And the key is the recognition of that everybody is, including the refugees, has an ability to make our societies better. So it's not us, but the refugees have something to add as well. So as LIMAC, we have partnered with the Ministry of the Foreign Affairs of Turkey, UNDP of Turkey, Bill and Melinda Gates Foundation, Qatar Foundation for Development, and another Turkish private company, Eczacıbaşı Holding. And we are really pushing for a new, genuine, and innovation model for solutions based on the partnerships between the private and the public sectors, plus international stakeholders. And in that perspective, one of the achievements that we have made of our work is that it's the first time ever we have just started a new project which has the International Sustainable Development Goals, the SDGs, is in the Center, and we started this SDG Impact Accelerator project. And by the way, it's a great joy for me also to see that there's a reference here in the SDG Impact Accelerator reference in the report. Actually, what we do is the initiative empowers entrepreneurs in the global level, not only in the Turkish level, but in the global level, to find innovative solutions to improve the lives of the refugees. And we launched a program in July 2019. And on the first team, the entrepreneurs have developed solutions for the refugees to have access to the livelihood opportunities through digital ID solutions and access to sanitation through reinvented new toilets. And actually, we completed the first term. And just before the pandemic, actually, the entrepreneurs and the teams that we have selected were going to go into the refugees in Turkey around Gaziantep to the field. And unfortunately, due to pandemic, we have to postpone the field part of it. We'll do it just soon. But the teams and the entrepreneurs are working on the idea right now. And actually, we recently decided as the second step of the program, we will we will do projects for the COVID and any other future pandemics, if this as a second part of the project. And this is exactly the type of the collaboration that we need most, I think, in the world. There is a long-term thinking that we desperately need to see more across the globe, partnerships, especially in those times. And looking back to the start of the year, the world has changed almost beyond recognition. And this is a real crisis that's not like we have ever seen. And one day, maybe this year, maybe next year, the vaccine is to be found, and COVID-19 pandemic will come to an end for sure. However, the challenges will still be there. The climate change challenge, the refugee challenge, the migration challenge, the inequalities. And unfortunately, these challenges, they don't have a vaccine like COVID. And the solution is that we have to change the way we work and the way we cooperate. And as for refugees, we definitely have to make sure that the refugees, as all the speakers have said, they are not left behind, or they are not left vulnerable to the health and the social impacts of the coronavirus epidemic. And therefore, we need fresh solutions to the refugee situation, and this is more urgent than ever. Thank you.
Ebru, wonderful. You're absolutely right. So many of these challenges do not have a vaccine. And it's great to hear what you said, that the business case needs to be repeated. Ebru, thank you very much indeed. All right, let's go back to Daniela from the UNHCR and talk about women. Very important. Daniela Chiquela from the UNHCR. So your work, Daniela, supports refugees to build their own livelihoods and focuses particularly on refugee women. Now, this report, it underlines that women are especially vulnerable when it comes to employment. Can you share with us some examples, specific challenges actually that Syrian women face in their access to work, and how can we help them?
Thank you, Maria. Women employment, as we mentioned, employment also refugee women is a particular challenge at global level, including in Turkey. As the Atlantic Council and the UNDP report that has been launched today stress indeed, is that this happens also in Turkey. And they indicate that it is estimated that 37.3% the participation in the labor market of Turkish women. And if we look into refugees, the percentage is much lower. In 2018, for instance, there was a study, the Syrian migrant sample, that indicated that less than 9% of Syrian refugee women were working at the time of the report. This, of course, is creating a lot of challenges. And if we consider also the specific time, as Ebru has highlighted very well just earlier, the reference impact of COVID, we also, it's important to mention that Syrian women have been often working in areas quite affected also by the COVID situation, agriculture, textile, but particularly service industry. So our participatory assessment also and survey have been the tools, the way in which UNHCR works and communicated together with partners with the refugee community, indicates what are the main challenges, the main barriers. One of them, of course, not surprisingly, is language skills. But beside this, it is important to mention also that there are some sort of cultural barriers, gender norms as well as also lack of affordable childcare, and also, let's not forget, the elderly care services. So in order to tackle the low participation of women in the labor market, and especially of refugee women, again, a joint effort together with the Turkish authorities and all our partners is definitely important, is definitely essential to make the required progresses. UNHCR, together with other partners, other UN sister agencies, is working very close, also in alignment with the Ministry of Family, Labour and Social Services, to work more particularly on what we call it a gender-friendly employment context, and more sensitive business also practices. What does it mean? It means that altogether we need to try to find also opportunity and create opportunities. Also in this context of COVID, there may also be suggest more additional attention to other areas. But what concretely we are doing? So UNHCR and other partners, government and UN sisters, I mentioned, private sector and so on, under also the 3RP partners, we are working in trying to enhance the participation of women in the labor market through, for instance, language classes, but also do some small step in terms of support from childcare, as I mentioned earlier, elderly care, to allow women to participate more effectively in training and vocational programs. So what is very important, what we are trying to do together, and also increasingly also with the private sector, is to support the women entrepreneurship, and trying to get them engaged and support the startups grants and other kind of initiative and suggestion, like also highlighted very well in the report being launched today of UNDP and Atlantic Council, with respect also to the e-commerce, the e-work opportunities that this COVID time has also shared with us more and given opportunity to focus more. Also, what we are doing together, we are trying to work more on cooperative, women cooperative, that can give opportunities, I mentioned also this gender sensitive business framework that can be enhanced. Some example that I can give, two very good examples. For instance, a very good initiative has been undertaken with Istanbul, Zeytinburnu Municipality Center for Family, Women, Support and Disabled, where there's an interesting cooperative experience that is being undertaken. But also talking more on the private sector and looking at EBRO and the opportunity to work all together even more is also the initiative of the GAP initiative that is trying to enhance the soft skills and training project for refugee women in order to facilitate a bit more the understanding, the learning of the situation of the business, but also the context, in order to easy and to face more effectively the barrier to employment altogether. Thank you.
Thank you so much. Daniela from the UNHCR, thank you so much. Now, we are going to go back to Ebru Özdemir in a minute, but first of all, I want to just quickly say hello to our audience if you've just joined us, and I hope you're enjoying the discussion. And a quick reminder about our Q&A at the end of the panel. I'm sure you have lots of questions for our panelists. So the procedure is as follows. Please ask your questions in the Q&A box. Put your name, your title, and your affiliation, and we will do our very best to answer all of them, but no anonymous question. That is questions. That is the golden rule. Okay, let's go back now to Ebru Özdemir from Limak, and this is my last question to you, Ebru. So let's talk about skills and training, because the report, what it does is it really talks or highlights the fact that it's not just about creating jobs, that are investing in essential training and skills is hugely important. Now, because that is such an important part of really building the resilience for refugees, that is the title, and we've been talking about. And it isn't something quick. It's not a quick fix, but it is essential. So what do you think can be done from the view of the private sector on this issue?
Thank you very much. Yes, this is something actually we are working on. You know, I think everywhere we have to shift from the short-term policies to the longer-term policies. We have to be innovative and new. We have to bring new techniques. But of course, it's very difficult, especially in the pandemic times, where we see globally there's an unemployment issue where all the governments, including the Turkish governments, are taking extensive measures to really create employment for everyone, for its own nationals. But also Claudia has said it's very important to speak the language and the training programs. And this, I mean, really employment is also been very important if the refugees can speak the language as well. For example, I mean, we need to equip these refugees with the tools and the skills to rebuild the future and to contribute to the host communities. For example, I'll give you an example. As I said, we have the young, the project that we are doing with the Turkish ministries plus the UNDP Engineer Girls of Turkey. Every year we select 100 students from all over Turkey, not only from the Ankara or Istanbul, but we choose students from Gaziantep, Erzurum, Trabzon, and so forth. And we bring them to participate in the program. This is a boutique program because we want to create the role models and also create an ecosystem. And since 2 years, we started to take in Syrian students, female students from engineering. There were 4, 2 of them graduated, and they were very successful, very good GPAs. And then, you know, one of them has even done a double major. And in our program, they have to do a voluntary work. This is something mandatory because, you know, people have to really create social impact and be good to the other people. They selected to work with the Syrian population, with the younger generations, and they taught them Turkish language, English language, but also coding and computer programming as a part of their voluntary work. If we could do more on this, I think the training is very important so that they can gain the skills. And, you know, there are now over 3.6 million Syrians in Turkey. 44.5% is below 18, and 30% of them, more than even 30%, are the school aged. And these are very big numbers. The education, employment, the integration is going to be very, very important for them and for us. But we are ready to really bring their untapped human capital as a private sector by trainings and by programs so that we will all be able to live together. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much, Ebru Özdemir from Limak. And it's great to hear about the female engineers. I would love to interview some of them here on TRT World.
Wonderful.
Yeah, and really, as you say, a role model. Good luck with the rest of your work, and congratulations on what you've done so far. That really is fantastic. Thank you, Ebru Özdemir. Right, let's go back to Claudio, and we're going to talk about COVID-19 with Claudio. Incredible times we're living in right now. All of us are affected by this pandemic. It really is incredible. But something really interesting that even stood out for me was the fact that this report highlights that COVID can be both a risk and an opportunity to create a new normal for refugees where they can be included. And personally, as a journalist, I hadn't thought about the fact like it could also be an opportunity. So back to you, Claudio. My question to you in this context is, you said this report was building on the UNDP and Atlantic Council's experience over the past few years on livelihood and access to employment, but everything has changed, Claudio, in the past few months. So the recommendations of the report, how would you adapt them now to your work in this new normal?
Thank you, Maria. Very relevant question. Of course, we don't have the crystal ball, unfortunately. don't have a safe recipe for the COVID-19. Is a situation that globally is taking the toll on so many people and so many countries. So there is not an easy answer to your question, but it is indeed a golden question, because COVID-19 has changed so many things, has made things more difficult also for the refugees, and can be turned into an opportunity. And I will try to elaborate a little bit on why. First of all, you're right when you say that COVID-19 has impacted everybody and everything, including the refugees, who have actually, as a matter of fact, been disproportionately affected. According to a survey, 83% of the refugees report a deterioration of their livelihoods, and half no longer able to meet their basic needs. So this is taking a toll on the refugees. This has everything to do with the fact that the refugees are predominantly working informally and have been therefore been hit hardest. This is what were already highlighted report as a key factor undermining resilience. And that's why we emphasize in our policy option the importance of formal employment and decent jobs, because these come attached to social security and therefore the capacity to withstand shocks as of COVID-19. So this reinforces this policy option and this message in terms of what the report found out. So under the COVID-19, as you know, this developed very quickly from a health crisis to a humanitarian crisis in many countries, and generally in a socio-economic crisis and situation. And therefore, the UN is carrying out, and in Turkey as well, a socio-economic impact analysis and developing a response framework to the impact of the COVID-19. And so we are making sure, coming to your question, that the analytical work that will lead and will basically have as a result the new programming and the new initiatives of the United Nations in Turkey with regard to the COVID-19. So this is a very important element. As Ebru was saying before, coming back to the report, I do believe that the part of the work on the digital livelihoods has become even more critical in this new reality. So on one side, we're having, of course, the social security and the decent jobs and the formality, but then we have the digital livelihoods. So we're showcasing here a range of options that online work and digital solution can bring to the current challenges faced by refugees. This can be suitable also for other vulnerable populations. For example, we know from our colleagues from UNDP Bangladesh that there is a real demand for people doing data entry in Arabic. Look at for Syrian refugees an untapped opportunity and resources also to get refugees more involved into this business. And so I'm happy to say that we've been able to adapt quite quickly to the impact of COVID-19 as well in some of our programs. The adult language training that I was mentioning before, using a blended method, including online learning before the COVID-19. And so, of course, in the COVID-19 situation, we've been able to go one step further and to use this experience for other interventions as well. And together with the private sector's partners, also we have conducted regular surveys on the impact of needs of businesses, including Syrian businesses operating in Turkey, to keep basically on the pulse of the private sector in terms of how COVID-19 has impacted. And of course, here the message is that small and medium enterprises and micro enterprises especially have been disproportionately hit, and the ones owned by Syrians amongst these has been even harder hit. So this has provided important information for our action. And so helping Syrian businesses to digitalize, in other words, is definitely an avenue of opportunities for job creations and for self-reliance. Let me conclude here, maybe also with a word of caution as well, and a call for solidarity, because as we were saying at the beginning, Turkey has shouldered the bulk of the cost associated with hosting and assisting the refugees. And despite the results that have been achieved so together and the creativity and determinations demonstrated, the level of support of the international community must not only be maintained, but actually also increase. Because one thing is the policy option, of course, that we're exploring here, but the other one is also the funding of this policy option and the role that the international community must proactively play in and funding these action and these opportunities. So the only way really to deliver on our global commitments that the UNHCR colleague was mentioning before for the burden sharing with the refugees and hosting community and leave no one behind is to call once again upon the international community to be with us and to strongly support the Turkish government, the Turkish authority, and the people, basically, on top, of course, of the Syrian refugees that are hosted here. Over to you.
Claudio, thank you so much. And don't go anywhere, because we have a question coming to you, Claudio, first of all. And so we have come now to the end of the formal discussion. It is now time for us to hear from you, the audience, and we've received some questions. And we open up the floor to you, the audience, for the Q&A now. So we have a question, first of all, for you, Claudio. And this is the question. In the unique context of Turkey and the temporary protection measures, how can we define social cohesion, also in reference to resilience and development? Claudio.
Very interesting question. I will try not to focus on the semantics, but on the substance and the way at least I interpret this question is when we talk about social cohesion, we are talking about refugees and host communities to be together, to stick together. In order to do that, of course, jobs and opportunities are a key issue. And this is at the core of resilience. A little bit the idea is, how do we move from an assistance perspective to a long, medium and long-term perspective that enhances the self-reliance of individuals and families. And this can do and must be done in a social cohesion environment, because otherwise, by favoring one or another group, we will be undermining actually the whole objective that we are trying to pursue. So this is to say that in the specific case of Turkey, social cohesion must be very much at the heart of our intervention and what we are supporting if we want developmental or resilience-based solution to work. We can call it also integration. We can call it inclusion. There are different ways of, here is called technically by the government counterparts, harmonization, but that's what we're talking about at the end of the day. I hope this provides some light on this question.
Claudio, thank you so much. And I hope the audience member got the answer that he or she wanted. Right, next question is for Daniela from the UNHCR. Daniela, this is the question. What role do local Turkish civil society organizations play in promoting harmonization between Turkish host communities and Syrian refugees? Daniela.
Thank you very much, Maria. I think it's a very important question, also because, as I mentioned earlier, the resilience of refugees is essential also when it comes to social cohesion, but also harmonization. It is very important that also in this area, as I mentioned earlier, there is a lot of joint work being done with the government institution, with the UN sister partner agencies, and also with the private sector. So in this respect, there are a number of initiatives that have already been ongoing in terms of harmonization in Turkey. And during this period of COVID, for instance, we've also been seeing how the civil society and the refugee community and local community have been working together. One example for all, for instance, that just come to my mind is the fact that a number of Syrian refugees with a health professional background have been actually contributing also to the health institution here in Turkey. And this also, it's a very important emblematic element to see also in the case of need how refugee community and the local host communities can actually work together in function of an harmonization that can go beyond this time, but can also address other elements of the normal life and the civil society engagement.
Daniela, don't go anywhere because there is another question for you. And this one is about school children. About a quarter of school-age school children are out of school. And with COVID-19, this number is likely to increase. So can you tell us about any plans to deal with this important issue to prevent a lost generation?
Thank you, Maria, for this additional question. I had to say that the UN Refugee Agency worked very closely with all the other sister agencies, in particular also UNICEF, UNDP, and also the government institution, education institution. It is true, the COVID situation has been created an impact also on the quality of education, not only the access to education. There are a number of measures that are being discussed also with partners, with private sector, to see how the access to education can be ensured to the most vulnerable children. And we are not talking only about refugees, but also in the host community society. So I think this is another area that has been calling for joint efforts, a new innovative solution to enhance the opportunity to address and to access education and quality education also in difficult time. And I think this experience of COVID has given to us some ideas and some opportunities to reflect more and to improve actually the system.
Daniela, thank you so much. And I'm being told that this comes to the end of our Q&A session. But if there are any points that were raised during these two questions or anything else that was mentioned from the panelists, if our panelists want to say anything, now is your opportunity.
May I just add one thing so I conclude? I think it's very important also to mention that in Turkey, Turkey is not only hosting Syrian refugees, but also refugees on different nationalities. And I think the important conclusion of this study of the also done together also by the colleagues from the UNDP and their partners, it is important to really stress that they are applicable also to the non-Syrians. And maybe there are also opportunities in the future to look more into the nuances of different refugee communities in terms of to address barrier and to make a more constructive planning altogether. So just a word also on the non-Syrians. Thank you.
All right, thank you so much, Daniela Cichella from the UNHCR. And that does indeed wrap up our Q&A session here today. Thank you for sending in those questions to our audience watching online. We really appreciate it. Now, before we go, I would like to invite two people, the co-author institutions of the report that we have today, Claudio Tomasi from the UNDP, and also a new voice that we haven't heard yet, Defne Arslan, Atlantic Council representative and director of the Atlantic Council here in Turkey, to close the event. Over to you, Claudio, first of all.
Thank you, Maria, again. I think that today we heard a lot of very interesting perspective and intervention. By way of concluding the event, on top, of course, of thanking all of you for the great work that you've been putting into this, and for Bastian, the main author of this report as well, I would like to leave you with maybe one of the key messages for me. And this message is around how to move from the burden idea to the opportunity idea. And within the COVID-19, how to turn this into, again, a building back better discussion. Because thanks to the COVID-19, which has brought so much harm on all of our societies, we are forced anyway to rethink so many things that from a developmental perspective we have been doing, and this includes our work with the refugees as well. So my invitation to all of us is to use this opportunity to rethink, to build back better, and to do some of the things that we're doing in a different way, And this report, I think, contributes in that sense of reflection, what has been working, what has not been working, what the policy options are, and looking ahead in a bold way and basically into the future in order to go to the next step of our support. Over to you.
Thank you so much. Claudio Tomasi, resident representative of the UNDP in Turkey. Thank you for your closing remarks. And now we bring in our last guest and a voice that we haven't heard yet, Defne Arslan, Atlantic Council representative and director of the Atlantic Council in Turkey. The floor is yours for the closing remarks.
Thank you, Maria, for this great moderation and housekeeping. And thank you all for joining us for this very interesting and timely discussion today. I would like to thank Resident Representative Claudio for the great cooperation between our organizations, and big thanks and congratulations, of course, to Bastien Ravel, the author of the report, who did a fantastic job. And my deputy Pınar Dost and Grady Wilson, and thank you to both of you. You did tremendous job in preparation, and also to our fantastic communications team from Washington, D.C. Taking this opportunity, of course, I would like to thank to all our speakers, Daniela, Cekiela, Ebru Özdemir, for joining us today and sharing their insights, as well as the Turkish Foreign and Labor Ministries for their support during the preparation of this joint report. And thank you, Deputy Minister Kram and Mirjana Egger. It's an honor hosting you both today, and thank you, Damon, for kicking off this great event and report. In these challenging global times, it is all more important to ensure livelihoods of our most vulnerable populations. Through this report and event, I do hope we can advance the conversation towards the increased economic inclusion of Syrian refugees in Turkey to build resilience, self-sufficiency, and sustainability. I am very happy we had the opportunity to discuss this topic today and to highlight the positive role Turkey is playing on improving lives of Syrian refugees. As the Sustainable Development Goals underline, let's leave no one behind. I do hope to see you all at our next Atlantic Council in Turkey event, which will be actually next week. And thank you again. Thank you much. Bye-bye.
Thank you so much. Defne Arslan, Atlantic Council representative and director of the Atlantic Council here in Turkey. And I wish you and also Claudio at the UNDP great luck, a lot of luck and success to all your teams with the refugees, especially, as we've said, during these very challenging times. And I would like to thank our panelists. I'm going to thank them all. First of all, Damon Wilson, Executive Vice President of the Atlantic Council, who joined us from Washington. Thank you. Also to His Excellency Yavuz Selim Kiran, Deputy Minister of Foreign Affairs, Republic of Turkey. Thank you. Mariana Spoljaric-Eger, Assistant Administrator and Director, Regional Bureau for Europe and the Commonwealth of Independent States at the UNDP. Thank you so much, Mariana. Claudio Tomasi, an extra special thank you, Resident Representative of the UNDP Turkey. Ebru Özdemir, Chairperson of Limak Investments. Thank you so much for sharing that private sector perspective. It was wonderful. Daniela Cekiela, Deputy Representative for Protection at the UNHCR. Thank you so much for taking also all those questions from the Q&A. And our last guest, Defne Arslan, again, thank you to you from the Atlantic Council representative and director of the Atlantic Council in Turkey. Our panelists, thank you. To our audience watching us online, thank you very much for staying with us for this hour and a half. It's been great to have your company. And last but not least, thank you to everybody that has put this event online together. From TRT World, I'd like to thank my floor manager, Lerzan Efe Onur at the Atlantic Council, Jackson, Grady, Zeynep Pinar at the UNDP, Bastien, Fake, and Seher. I hope I haven't forgotten any names. And back to our audience, I really encourage our audience to read the report. You can find it online at the Atlantic Council in Turkey website and also the UNDP Turkey website. And as we say goodbye, I close with this important message. As we've heard today, and as we say goodbye, we've heard that refugees are resilient, a great word, resilient. They are not only victims of war and displacement, but also women, men, boys and girls with real potential, untapped human potential, as we've heard, to improve their lives and to better and contribute to their communities. But it has also become clear today that we have the power to transform a crisis like the Syrian conflict into a positive story of solidarity, empowerment, and progress. Thank you all for your company. Thank you to our guests, our audience, and everybody behind the scenes, the technical support staff that we've mentioned at the UNDP, TRT World, and the Atlantic Council that contributed to the live event. And a very special, extra special thank you to Bastien Revel, the author of the report that we have discussed here today. Bastien, fantastic, congratulations. Hoşça kal, goodbye from Istanbul. Have a lovely weekend, everybody. Thank you for your company.